This immigrant story highlights Gisela Silva, a current 20-year-old student at the University of Florida. She is from Lima, Peru, and is an interesting case study as her mother is American and her father is Peruvian. She grew up as a member of the middle to upper class in an apartment on the side of the mountain in the district of Surco and attended an international school, Colegio Franklin Delano Roosevelt, American School of Lima. Over the course of the interview, she expresses her great appreciation for her international school as it has allowed her to meet various individuals with different backgrounds, ethnicities, and cultures. Within her home, she spoke English to her mother and Spanish to the remainder of a Peruvian family and friends. Her bilingualism has a large effect on her ability to gain acceptance from university peers and gain inclusionary status from U.S. individuals and government, which will later be illuminated through analysis. Gisela's relationship with family and friends was embodied through her close-knit community found within her apartment complex. She has a super close relationship with her two older sisters, Daniela and Gabriela, and even shared a room with Daniela. Every Sunday, she and her sister spent the day with their grandparents, and her parents joined them for dinner. Gisela met the majority of her friends through the interaction with those that she met living within her apartment building. In fact, she recalls that she and her best friends played a robbers game. They would put socks on their heads and would use the elevator to run around the building. It is noted that she did not have many toys growing up. Instead, she played in the building with her friends, signaling a distinct difference in Peruvian values and culture. Children relied on their imagination and cultivated creativity rather than being provided with tangible items. When her two parents divorced when she was 14, her dad moved in with her paternal grandmother, and her two sisters each moved to the U.S. These pull factors finalized her innate desire to live in the United States for a long period, allowing her to experience the other half of her identity she's barely ever known. 4 years later, this seemingly distant dream became a reality. Gisela Silva left Peru and moved to Gainesville, Florida in the U.S. in August 2015. Before further sharing her story and analyzing the various contexts of reception, it is vital to have a foundation on Peru, the city of Lima, and how Gisela's unique identity affected her preconceived notions of the United States. The Republic of Peru is located in the western corner of the South American continent. Boasting spectacular scenery and rich culture, Peru is a developing nation that has recently been experiencing an economic boom that has been attracting foreign investment. The nation is currently following democratic practices and is led by President Martin Vizcarra, who plans to tackle corruption. It is one of his highest priorities. Historically, Peru is the last nation to gain independence from Spain in 1824 and has had decades of instability due to military dictatorship, civil wars, and conflicts with neighboring nations such as Chile and Ecuador. In the 1980s, one conflict in particular, a civil war with guerrillas attempting to overthrow the government, Sendero Luminoso, resulted in over 70,000 deaths and has had a profound effect on the current political climate. Individuals are wary of the guerrilla influence in the government as the guerrilla groups from the 80s and 90s still have a following. Today, conflicts mostly surround the production and distribution of narcotics, as Peru is now the world's leading producer of cocaine. Culturally, Peru has been rapidly developing in terms of its manufacturing sector, industry, and technology. Apart from its development, there is still distinct preservation of Peruvian indigenous culture as these groups still inhabit a large portion of the mountainous region. Modern life in Lima mirrors both a developing nation stricken with poverty as well as a highly affluent society with art, music, and theater. Differences in lifestyle mostly depend on geography and their class membership. Those that inhabit the mountainous regions mostly rely on agricultural production as their chief source of income. In addition, many of the people have formulated distinct communities that practice their own customs. There is not much wealth associated with mountain life unless big corporations involved with mining and industry have holdings. Urban members can belong to a variety of classes. The urban poor have often had to work multiple jobs to provide for themselves and their families. They typically live in shanty towns and highly congested neighborhoods. The middle to middle upper classes are much more participatory in civil society, having the resources to devote time to sporting events, cultural practices such as daily siestas after a large noon meal, and artistic engagements. The wealthy often have live-in or full-time servants as well as multiple properties, playing a large role in local politics. The growing disparities between their respective classes is evident in their close physical contact, as shantytowns often border affluent neighborhoods, but their social interaction is quite limited. Growing income inequality and vast poverty was a key observation that Gisela had while growing up. She states that seeing the stark contrast between two different levels of the economy and seeing that you're literally only 5 minutes away from it was something that always kept me grounded. Seeing this type of poverty has a large effect on her perception of the world itself. Factors that engender migration include push and pull factors that cause the ultimate moving of an individual or group. Factors that caused Gisella's move to the U.S. include her feelings of exasperation surrounding Peruvian poverty, her two sisters' migration to the U.S. and the presence of her mother's extended family, educational opportunities, as well as half of her identity that she always had a desire to connect with and experience. This migration was possible due to her U.S. citizenship through her mother. The Peruvian national community in the United States only accounts for 1.1% of the U.S. Hispanic population. Two-thirds, or 68% of all Peruvians, are foreign-born, and 48% of all Peruvians are U.S. citizens. Geographically, the largest concentration of Peruvian immigrants lives in South Florida, 39%. The other large percentage lives in the Northeast region. Of those that live in the Southeast region, the majority of the immigrants live in Miami, Florida. As we have discussed in The Making of a Life in Multi-Ethnic Miami, Rhonda states, in this global city, reminded of their places of origin, where their personal and group identities were originally formed and nurtured, Miami's cultural and sometimes built landscape, as well as its geographic proximity to Latin America and the Caribbean, facilitate a translocal process of emplacement that involves creating sustainable sociocultural environments in which prevailing practices, interpretations, or attitudes origin. By combining translocal placemaking with co-present strategies that allowed immigrants to feel the security of active embeddedness in relationships from the natal home, immigrants evoked the comforts of the natal home in their everyday lives in Miami. Since Gisella's immigration to the U.S. is highly unique due to her identity as half American, her mother frequently told her about American culture and life prior to her arrival. In Latin America, the U.S. is viewed as highly individualistic, which is inferred to be self-serving, and strays away from family values. Not knowing much about her U.S. family helped perpetuate those stereotypes as they were distant. In addition, U.S. consumerism was a highly discussed preconceived notion. It sounds silly, but it's crazy how you can go to the grocery store and there are like 30 different types of Doritos to choose from besides the original. On one hand, it's awesome because you have so many options, and on the other hand, it's bad because I spend like 3 hours at Publix looking through everything. Stated by Gisella. Gisella's life in Peru was much more simple as it focused on interpersonal relationships rather than an overstimulation of 10 brands selling the same product. Theorists Richard Buskirk and James Roth argue that consumerism stems from the notion of the individual as having the ultimate choosing power, and U.S. imperialistic sentiment has been transcended to the average U.S. American. Lastly, the socioeconomic class structure in the U.S. can be very devastating to hopeful immigrants looking for new opportunities. Not only was Gisella shocked to see so many homeless people, but she did not realize that many were inhibited from upward mobility. For young immigrants, poverty fosters less favorable health outcomes and creates a higher probability of teen childbearing. There's a false image of prosperity and the ability of young people to automatically prosper, inhibiting the tainted reality of the American dream. After many of her preconceived notions of the U.S. were proven to be true, Gisella relocated to Gainesville, Florida to attend the University of Florida. Her desire to attend a U.S. university to further her educational endeavors was possible through her ability to receive in-state tuition through her maternal grandmother's Florida residence. Once settled in the U.S., Gisella was perceived very differently than her counterparts. She found a distinct balance where in some situations she was noticeably the other, a Peruvian national. At other times, she was exclusively a well-educated American with a slight accent. In terms of language, her bilingualism is very formative in her experience as she grew up in a bilingual environment, overcoming a grave challenge that many other immigrants face. Second language acquisition theory states that the notion of native speakers and non-native speakers, with native speakers being considered as the ultimate model of language acquisition. But defining nativeness itself appears to be complicated both psycholinguistically and socioculturally. At the individual level, what factors account for the primary elements of nativeness are still not clear. In other words, it is hard to evaluate her perception as the other in terms of language as she started learning English when she started learning Spanish. Another element is the racial aspect of assimilation and inclusion. Gisella herself acknowledges the fact that due to her light complexion and light eyes, she's frequently white passing. Whiteness is central to define the threatening character of racialization. Educationally, her ability to attend an international school provided her with opportunities to experience various cultures and learn the importance of tolerance and inclusion. This perspective allows for her to relate to other new groups, as there is a large possibility that she was already exposed to their customs. Through this distinct set of circumstances, Gisella's case study represents an outlier and is ultimately refreshing, as it is nice to hear that not every U.S. newcomer, whether they have citizenship, has faced excessive discrimination. Collegiately, Gisella is aware of the opportunities the University of Florida has provided her with. She became an involved member of the campus as a Florida Cicerone and a group fitness instructor, helping to develop her communication skills both professionally and personally. She studies event management, a newfound passion of hers. If she were to remain in Peru and wanted to have changed her track of study, she would have to start her 4-year journey completely over. Highlighting these advantages is important, but it is also vital to recognize many of the disparities that the U.S. collegiate system fosters. In terms of reception, many Peruvian students view U.S. education as an outlet to party. She was afraid that she would not fit in socially, as she identifies herself as not a big partier. There is also an expectation that international students can form a community. By attending an international school in Peru, she assumed that their friendship and support would be mirrored on the university level in the U.S. Finding little support, she felt alone throughout most of her first semester. These feelings of isolation and uncertainty are a sad reality of the social processes of immigration in the U.S. Despite variances in whiteness or English language speaking abilities, her isolation is normalized, and little is done to change outreach within education. In summation, Gisela Silva is grateful for the opportunity to immigrate to the U.S. and does not regret this decision. She is aware that many other immigrants face additional hardships that she has faced and is aware of the fear associated with deportation. Gisela's case study directly illustrates how mixed identities and contexts of reception directly affect how individual newcomers are perceived in society, giving some advantages while others are disadvantaged. Her identity is a product of her environment, and her collective identity as a Peruvian, as a citizen of the United States, and as a Latin American. Finding her place within the U.S. is a constantly developing process that will continue to shape her experience.